Welcome to the All Central Podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Larry Kirk. I'm joined today by the great theologian, the Baltimore theologian, Jonathan Prothero is in the house with us. Welcome, Jonathan. We also have a special guest with us today who is a returning guest. Again, he's going to be sorting out our brains a little bit today, hopefully helping us with some stuff. Tony McCusker is with us. Man, it's good to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you back, man.
Good.
And the last podcast that we had, you really started to unpack so many things, really from a medical standpoint as well. Just some of the things that people are dealing with, anxiety, stress, all the stuff that our world is dealing with right now. Suicide rates are higher. Everything is just climbing, even with young people. And it's not just us old guys, and old people that are struggling with certain things in our life because of life. But we're seeing a lot of young people being having some issues when it comes to mental health. And so again, when we go into this today, there was something that I believe you mentioned in the last one that we kind of wanted to tackle today. And you wanted to talk about cognitive distortions today a little bit. But I also want to intersect a little bit more, and I don't know if this will affect our conversation today, but also the spiritual side of things as well.
Absolutely.
I know we've done a lot from a medical standpoint and talked about those things, but also from a spiritual side as well, if we can kind of dive into that. Let's go into the word cognitive distortions.
Yeah. Cognitive distortions are basically just the way that we think, the way we perceive things. So one, for instance, would be catastrophizing. So that's when you catastrophize, you make everything big. So it's like turning a mountain out of a molehill. Okay. So they see everything in extremes and they would blow it up to be a bigger deal than what it really is.
I think Jonathan deals with that.
Really? Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I make molehills out of mountains. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
That's the way to do it. Yeah. So it's, which comes with that is a lot of worrying.
Okay.
And then with that would be anxiety because you're constantly worrying about stuff. You're worrying about everything because there's no small thing. Emotional reasoning is a big one where we tend to, if you feel it, it's true.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, isn't it?
And then they're led by their emotions.
Yeah.
So there's
is that why we see so much craziness and so much visceral things that are like on like social media and just different things because of how people feel about a particular thing. Yeah. And they just express it to the over here, so high that it's such an extreme thing. You're like, whoa, chill out. We're having a conversation.
Right. And I find it as I'm watching this take place and how people are having these different, I don't know how to say it, these different ideas and where they stand. And there's a feeling out there or a philosophy, I guess, that says, if you don't agree with me, I don't know if it's philosophy, but if you don't agree with me, then you're my enemy.
Oh, that is a philosophy though.
And that tends to be growing.
Yeah.
So
we see that in politics.
Oh yeah. I think they're the ones who are really pushing it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't bring people together. It divides people.
Yeah.
Instead of people understanding that we're different, everybody's different. Even those who are in the same camp are different from each other in certain ways. We all need each other and we need to come together and figure out what's your strong points, what's my strong points, where's my weaknesses and yours, and how can we build on those and and work it that way. Instead, excuse me, I'm sorry, we're led by our emotions. So you say something I don't agree with, well, now I'm offended and I'm going to blow up and I'm going to be led by that instead of stepping back and saying, wait a minute, I'm going to take a minute, I'm going to logically process this and then come at it from that standpoint. So there's an dialectic behavioral therapy, which is from cognitive behavioral therapy. It was kind of birthed out of it. They have something called the wise mind. So basically it's two circles that intersect. And the one side is the rational mind. It's when nothing's going on, everything's fine. We make choices out of our logic. The emotional mind is when we're in a situation that's causing our emotions to rise and we make choices out of our emotions. The wise mind is when the two intersect. That is when we're dealing with something that's emotional, but we've learned to cope and to control our emotions so that we can respond in logic, not emotion, because emotion is just going to lead you down a road that you don't want. And I think we're putting way too much trust in our feelings.
But it's a great point that you make, because I've heard a lot of preachers talk about we have to ignore all emotion. Emotions aren't real. Emotions aren't truth. And there's some truth in that. But I love, you're talking about this integration, that when we can't become so hermetically sealed that it's just about logic and rationale. But like you say, wisdom is found in the integration of these two things coming together and marrying those things together.
Because if we say that emotions aren't real, then we're saying that something God created us with and something he has is not real.
Right.
Yeah.
Anger, like I'll ask some clients, especially if they're dealing with anger and they see the results of it. But what we tend to do is put the emotion on the hot seat.
Yeah.
And we'll say, so I'll say, so is anger a bad emotion? And they'll say yes. I'll say, is happiness a bad emotion? No. How about fear? Some say yes, some say no. So then I'll ask, okay, so you're walking down the street and your child's there and somebody tries to abduct your child. Are you going to get angry? They'll say, yeah. What's that anger going to do? It's going to push me to protect them. So it's not bad. It's not the emotion that's the issue. It's your response out of the emotion, not understanding how to handle it. And I think it's because our perceptions are off.
And it's like we almost don't have structures, internal structures and architecture in place in culture today that help us know what to do when, particularly with overwhelming emotions. We don't know what to do with it. So take the child who's being taken by some stranger. The emotion is so overwhelming for a lot of us that we haven't developed any kind of maturation or maturity in terms of what do I now do with this emotion? Or I disagree with you, and it's so overwhelming that it does become overwhelming. It overwhelms us. It takes over. And so what do you do with people that need to create that architecture? How do you go about learning how to control your emotions, as a simple way of saying
First of all, where was this yesterday when I had to drop my son off at the Newark airport?
Right.
Talk about angry.
Oh, right.
It's that bad. It's just traffic.
Oh my gosh. It's New York is like right. On the fringe of New York and New Jersey, and just like, oh my gosh.
Right.
I needed this yesterday.
Right. So he's driving to Newark. People are cutting him up. People don't care about his time, his schedule, all of that. Anger's rising. What do you do with clients? Where do you even begin with somebody who's just like, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how to even start.
Right. So one of the acronyms that I teach them is called STOP. So it's stop, take a step back, observe, proceed mindfully. So the first thing you're going to do when you feel it's first, because here's the thing, if you were on a hill, and let's say the hill is 50 feet long, right? And you're standing beside a rock that's about 50 pounds, and you're standing right beside it, and it begins to move, you could lean into it and stop it without a problem, right? Go halfway down the hill, let the 50-pound rock be rolling towards you, you're not stopping it.
Not stopping it.
That's the same thing with anger. Once we let anger get to the point to where it's there, you're not going to stop us. You'll just go ahead and blow up and do your thing. It's catching it in the beginning. So one, we need to know what our warning signs are. So we are going to have driving. Yeah, well, that's the trigger. The warning sign would be maybe like feeling flush, confusion, heart beating fast, starting to feel hot. Maybe sweating, whatever it is, clenching fist. Feeling your body get tense. So there's different things like that are at the beginning. So it's being aware of your body, of your thoughts, and your emotion. So as soon as that starts, you freeze. Not literally, like if you're driving, you don't just in a crash or something, but you're going to stop and say, let me think about this. Like, let me take a step back from what I'm starting to feel, and let me just do some breathing. Some deep breathing, get myself to calm down a little bit, and then I'm going to observe. So that's taking a step back. So I've stopped, taken a step back. Now I'm going to observe. I'm going to observe the situation. I'm going to observe my thoughts, and I'm going to observe my feeling. I'm getting angry. What's the first thought you had? And that's the automatic thought that
this
you want to capture.
This needs to be a class for people, man, today.
Right.
Just this right here. And I'm just talking about anger, but other emotions that
and you can use this with anxiety. You can use it with anything. It's just it's mainly geared towards anger, but you can use it for anything. So now you're going to observe that, and you're going to ask yourself, is this really a situation that I should be getting this angry about is, like you were saying, they don't care about my time. Is that a thought that pops in your head? Because if that is, it's like saying, hey, you don't care about me.
Right.
So, excuse me. So is that a truth? If it's not, and we need to put our thoughts on trial.
Yeah.
And question them.
Good.
Because if we're believing something that's a cognitive distortion, then, or maybe when we get in the car to drive, and I'm just using this, because you brought it up.
Sure.
If I'm going to get into the car to drive and I automatically have a feeling that this is going to be bad, you've already set yourself up.
Yeah. You're already set yourself
right?
up. Yeah.
Which is something called,
because I know nobody drives better than I do. So,
absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's just,
but in all seriousness, the anticipation is there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even if it's not something that would necessarily normally trigger you, because you've already set it up, it can be so minor, you're just ready to jump on it. But we take coming out of the car situation, we do that if I'm in a bad mood and I'm coming home and I've already predetermined, like if she's done this, or if this isn't done at home, or that this is yada yada, if the trash isn't taken out or something like that, I'm already finding things I can trigger myself with by the time I get home. Then I have almost justification to explode, because I can say, see, I knew this wouldn't have been done.
Yeah.
Yep. And if we're in that deep, like expectations and things need to be done a specific way, and they're not done that way, then I'm going to have a problem. That's called polarized thinking, or black and white thinking. It's either this way or that way. There's no gray. And either you perfect it or you're a failure.
Wow. Because I think in anything in life, when you have a perspective of something, or you just have a thought of what should be, I think there's always going to be disappointment, because it's never going to meet your expectations. At times it does, but there's so many things that don't meet your expectations. So dealing with disappointment, in that, how do you work through some of that? Because I'm sure there's listeners or people like dealing with a lot of disappointment in their lives. As a matter of fact, we talked about this a little bit this weekend, just about disappointment, and I think, and it's a very real thing, because you can die in your disappointment, so to speak. You can just stay there and live there. That all your expectations in the future are just people are just going to let you down, or this is going to, it's never going to work out your way, and it's a snowball effect of that, for people. And I think there's, but.
Yeah. So just to finish up that thing, so we've observed it. So once we've done that and we've calmed ourselves down, then we can proceed mindfully. And the mindful thing, you get into like a Eastern religion or something. It's really not about that. It's just about being aware. Yeah. Now I can proceed with your thoughts and your and I know your thoughts because you've spoken them to me, or even if that person that I have no idea, I can now proceed calmly to start thinking rationally. Yeah. Right. And I may not be completely, I may be at an 8 at anger, and now I'm down to a 4. Yeah. Well, that's great, because 4 is manageable possibly,
for someone. Yeah.
Right. And then it can go down from there. And then there's other things you can do for like interpersonal relationships and dealing with things. As far as a disappointment, like, I guess it would be, the sermon that you shared yesterday really spoke to me, because that actually literally happened in my life. Like it happened, and it, I think that with disappointment, we really need to be founded in our relationship with God. Yeah. I think it's imperative. Wow. When I found out that Michelle, when I found out she had MS, it kind of hit, but when she was going through all this, like, she couldn't walk.
And Michelle's your wife. That's just for those who just, Right.
For years, when we lived in Pennsylvania, I would get up to go to work, and I'd come out of the bathroom from getting ready, and she's crawling on the floor. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I can't walk. I can't get up. I was like, what the heck? So I had to get her up in bed, and I had to go to work. I was the only one working at the time. I had to bring in the food, you know what I mean? So I'd get her in bed. I'd get her all situated with, the stuff that she needed. And she had my parents' phone number there, and I would have to take my kids from PA to Westminster, drop off my kids, then go to the dealership, work, go back and get them like 10:30 at night or so, and do it all over again. And that went on for like 8 years, where she would be okay, and then she couldn't do anything. But so it was about 7-8 years, and then we finally found out, and this is hard. We lost our home, because that happened right around 2008.
Wow.
When everything started to collapse. Yeah. We lost our home, we lost vehicles. If it hadn't been for my parents opening up their home to us, we would have been homeless with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And it's disappointing because in my mind, I'm thinking, why?
Yeah.
Why is this happening?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, my gosh. So I'm at work one day in my office at Mountain Manor, and she gives me a call, and she says, because she had went to the doctors because her left eye, she couldn't see out of it. She was blind. And they went there and they're looking at her eye, and they did a CAT scan, and they're like, everything's fine. We don't see anything. So they sent her home. And the next morning they said, you need to get back in here right away. And she went back in, and the radiologist the next day re-looked at her scans, and they realized she had MS. And she called me, and she's like, I have MS. And there's a part of it that you're kind of like, now we know. But the other part is, this isn't heading anywhere good.
Yeah.
So I got up, I went to the window, I was frustrated. And I was like, God, why is this happening? I need to know why this is going on. And you know, that inner, right, he's speaking to you. He said, stop asking me why and start asking me what. Start asking me how. And it changed everything in that moment, because it was like, all right, so it's not about me. Because what I realized in that moment was that the why question is a self-centered question. It's putting me in the center instead of God being in the center.
That's good, bro.
And when I'm in the center, just like the diagram that Pastor Kirk goes over and that we go over a little bit in the Freedom group.
Yep.
And when we're in the center, there's two things in that diagram that never change. Is the Spirit, once God's got a hold of you, the security, the salvation, that's always the same. And the other thing that never changes are the things that happen outside of us, from friends, family, work. Those things never change. And then when they hit us, we become feelings about it, and we have certain perceptions about it, and then it produces hostility. So if he's in the center, then I can handle it, because it's not me handling it, it's him handling it. And and just understanding that God is sovereign over all.
Yeah.
And trusting in that. And that's a process of just dying to yourself, letting it go. So I think, like when we talk about reframing our thoughts, for the Christian, we need to reframe those thoughts with the Word of God. You know, when I'm feeling anxious, don't be anxious about anything, and know that verse. When we're focused on everything that's happening here, don't focus on things of the earth, set your focus on things above. You know, just know those scriptures and allow God to just make them a part of your being, not just in your head, but a part of who you are. And just realizing that I really don't have control.
Right. And I would add to that as well, with a lot of people, is don't feel a sense of guilt and shame if you know those scriptures and you're still feeling anxious, because it's a process. And that's kind of thrown around, that word process, a lot. It's a journey, or it takes time. Right. But the reality is, it's a cliche, because you know, it's true. It just takes time to build up and to embody that. That's kind of one of the things that I've been meditating a lot about, is it takes time to get something from here into here, from your head into your heart. Right. To know something is one thing, but for the Jewish people to know something meant experientially, not cognitively. So in our Western thinking, all knowing happens from the neck up. And so we kind of process everything in our brain, but for Jewish people to know that you don't have to be anxious for anything is sometimes a lifelong process of growing in that, and trusting and learning, and through life experiences like you've had. It's not just saying to myself, now, you know, if I'm anxious, that must make me a bad Christian or a bad follower of Christ. Because then what we're doing is we're adding guilt on top of anxiety, which adds more anxiety and guilt, and it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle for people.
Yeah, we're human.
Yeah.
Period. And I don't care who you are. You worry, and you're going to have times when you're anxious. And anxiety, again, is a good thing. Anxiety tells us, anger, anxiety, sadness, it tells us something's going on. And if we're tending to get anxious more now, like after COVID, or if somebody passed away and you're going through the whole process of grief, and you're finding yourself getting anxious about things, there's something going on internally. And we need to not just stuff that away with the scripture. We need to use the scripture as a comfort and to help us, but we need to dig in there and find out what's going on. And that's where we talked about last time about the neurotransmitters and formulating the pathways in our brain, and you do that for reframing, and just over and over and over and over until that becomes the way you think. That becomes the thought process instead of the old one.
The renewing of the mind. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And going back to what Jonathan, you guys were just talking about, Paul said, I've learned. That's the key word in that scripture. I've learned to be content.
Yes.
In other words, it's been a process for him as well. It's not like he all of a sudden, he's pumping out New Testament books and writings and stuff, and then he's got it all together. No, I've learned to be content through all of this.
Yep. And that comes through failures.
Yeah.
And suffering. Mm-hmm. And I think people have a bad view of what failure is. Failure is not a bad thing. It's it's inevitable. Mm-hmm. So just get past that.
Yeah.
And it's where we grow. It's where we learn. I mean, look at Ray Kroc, when he tried to, from a business standpoint, when he tried to franchise McDonald's, he had to refinance his house 7 times. Man. 7 times to get it to work.
Wow.
And he had McDonald's all over the place, and it was not successful. And he realized that it was about real estate, not about burgers. And he had to adjust, and he had to learn, and he had to figure it out. And once he did, boom. So it's the same thing with anything that we do.
Yeah.
With our spiritual life, it's not getting mad at God. It's not. And if that happens, okay.
Yeah.
Work through it. He says, "Come and let's reason this out together."
Yeah.
He's not offended. He's not upset. He's not on Facebook getting mad. He's saying, "Hey, I'm here. I get it. I already knew it anyway. So just come and talk to me about it. We'll work it out." He's that friend that sticks closer than a brother.
Yeah.
He's always there.
Yeah.
And there's promises we need to stand on. So when we're going through these things, we don't feel like a failure. And being around people, like being in groups, support groups and things, if we're dealing with this stuff, because that's why AA and Celebrate Recovery, that's why these things work, because they have the numbers there to support you. And then once you start to get your sobriety going, or you start getting past whatever it was that you're dealing with, now you're pouring into somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's that giving and receiving.
Yeah.
And that's where I really see the sowing and reaping.
Yeah.
I'm sowing into someone else. You're just going to get from that. And I think that's really a part of the sanctifying process, which is what we're doing, right? If whatever I'm trying to change, that's what we're doing. And we just got to be easy on each other, give ourselves a break, get off our own backs, or the ones we ride the most, and then just be gracious to everyone else, and just understand, man, this is a process. We're all working through it. That's it.
Yeah. And the key thing is to work through it. To work through it. This is a slight tangent. What do you do with people who? Can we talk about bad advice for a second? Because when it comes to small groups, people who are really loving, well-intentioned, for the most part, gracious people, but just say unhelpful stuff. I'll put it very politely. I'll say it that way. Unhelpful stuff or unhelpful wisdom. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking, I don't need professional help because I have God and I have my small group or I have my friends. What would you say to somebody, maybe they're watching even today and they're like, no, like I should be able to work this out by faith. I should be able to just work this out in my own spiritual life. And if I really, really struggle, I have something, then I have 3 friends that I can run to and talk to about this. Yeah. But they're also not finding any progress.
All right. I'd put it in a pretty drastic way, is if you were having pains in your chest, I wouldn't go to your friends. Probably go to a cardiologist, say if you talk to your primary care maybe. So friends are great. I have great friends. I have a friend, Jimmy, he'll put his finger in your face and tell you you're flat out wrong. And he loves you. That's why he's doing it to me. And he's helped me through some stuff, and I can do the same to him. And he's supportive. He's a great guy. But when it comes to mental health, I'm not talking to Jimmy, because Jimmy has no clue what he's talking about when it comes to mental health. He's not trained in it. So, and this isn't, you don't, and it's not, I'm not going to say I agree with everything in mental health.
Sure.
And I don't, but there's a lot of good stuff there, and it's understanding all of the inner workings. If you're dealing with trauma, that's a totally different beast. If you're dealing with anxiety or grief, you deal with those things in different ways. And saying, well, I have God, that should be enough. Well, God put people here for a reason, and God works through people.
Yeah.
And that's how and he has gifted some to be pastors and teachers, but he's also gifted people to be surgeons and to be mental health professionals and coaches and things that can help them and have a deeper understanding of what's going on and help them to develop the skills and work out some of the stuff upstairs, to help them process through it.
Yeah.
And friends and stuff are not going to do that. And it's kind of like the old thing where the guy was on the roof and there was a flood and he was asking to be saved. God save me, God save me. The helicopter comes by and he keeps saying, I'm waiting for God, and he drowns, right?
Yeah.
So you've got the help, but you don't want to go. And if you think it's because you're going to be perceived as crazy or something like that, therapists go to therapy.
Yeah.
I talked to my supervisor. I mean, that's set up. I talk to my supervisor has someone to talk to. They have someone to talk to, and it just...
I mean, I would think you guys would have to, because you're dealing with people's, like, you know, just from a pastoring standpoint, Jonathan, you know this, and Tony, you know a little bit of this too, but it can be very weighty. Like you take on the weight of top down, you know, and you take on the weight of the people that you're pastoring, the stuff that they're going through. So I would imagine, man, you guys, you know, listening and counseling every day, pretty much, you know, 4 or 5 days a week, whatever it is. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot. How do you separate, I guess, how do you separate that? And how do you personally separate that as well? Cause I don't know, for me, I just take a lot on, because I care.
Yeah,
and that's the thing, you know, you care. And so how do you work through that? Like, I know you go to counseling, all that, right? But it's,
I talked to my supervisor,
okay,
because I can't talk to my wife about it. I can't talk to other people about it because of confidentiality.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, so I go there, or if I felt that I needed more, then I would go get a therapist. It would be someone outside of where I work.
Yeah.
But I would go and get somebody to talk to, and I would go and dump it out, because we all have blind spots. So just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you've got yourself all figured out. And I'm not going to see things that other people see. So I need that perspective. I need you to look at me and hear what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And see the things that I don't see because I'm not able to.
Yeah.
So we all need that. And compassion fatigue, we had talked about that before, is what comes into play when you're helping people and you're taking on their burdens.
Yeah.
It becomes emotionally exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a place where you have to kind of create a separation, a professional, where you're separating yourself from this and you don't take it home. Like, when I'm done, and I don't think about it and I walk away. I've been able to develop that skill for the most part, but I can't do it all the time. And especially when it's with kids. And when things happen to kids or something, it just hits you, and you're just like, and then that's when I have to call my supervisor and say, look, I think I may need to talk.
Yeah.
And she's amazing. She'll be like, yep. And we'll set up a Zoom call and we'll talk.
Yeah.
Where I can dump it out. It's so important.
Good.
So it's,
that's really,
and then developing resilience, being able to develop that compassion resilience, or being able to develop the skills to let go of those things. So prayer, meditation, prayer is great for that. Worship, doing something that's just fun, that you just love to do. Working out is great. Exercising, eating healthy are all parts of it.
Yeah.
That emotional recharge, not just a physical, which can be part of it, but it's emotional recharge. Sometimes you can be physically drained by what you love doing, but emotionally fills you up.
Yep.
I think a lot of pastors sometimes they have been guilty of going home and dumping on their wives or dumping on their loved ones. Not just pastors, people who are tired. The people who are closest to us, they're going to get, this was my day. Here's everything. And if that's not the case, then sometimes there's been an issue of best practice where they'll share too openly in staff meetings or something like that. And I don't think it's a bad intention. I just think part of it is I can't carry this I can't carry the whole church's issues by myself. Yeah. So staff, here you go. But then there's a big issue with best practice in terms of spreading stuff. No, not at all.
I was just wondering, like, is this happening in our staff meetings, or is it?
We don't do this at all in our staff meetings, but I've sat in many.
Yeah.
And then there's a pastoral team. And some of them are, again, well-intentioned, none of them professionals. And now there's a whole team sharing stuff about, hey, this person's going through this. And the intention is let's get around them and help them, and who can connect and yada, yada, yada. But there's a big issue, you know, in your world that would never happen in a million years, because of all kinds of issues. And I think it's really interesting for people watching as well. Maybe it's not you that's going through difficult stuff, but maybe you know somebody and you've been trying to be their savior. You're the one who's like, don't see a therapist, like just connect to me, because there's a real savior complex sometimes with, hey, I have the answer.
Real codependency.
Yeah.
Which is very unhealthy.
So talk about that a little bit.
You see that a lot with addicts. They're the spouses or family members of someone who's an addict, because they find their identity in helping them and trying to fix them. And you can't fix anybody. You just got to really, and I'd say the hardest field that I was in was addictions. Because one, I don't think that they're going at it the best way. I don't think we set people up for success. And it is tough because you do get to like these people. I love addicts. Yeah. And that's a weird thing, just across the board. I love addicts.
Yeah.
And
you don't see that on bumper stickers.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean,
We'll make a good
I
one.
mean, but yeah.
You know,
But I think people would misunderstand it.
I think they would misunderstand it, but wow, that's a wow to me. Like that's,
and what I've tried to and get into them is that you don't understand the potential right now. All you see is I'm hurting. You've got the pain that brought you here, or the pain that's been a result of what you're doing. You see society looking at you saying you're a bum and you don't deserve anything. You're having all these difficulties and you can't see past that. So what I try to do is get them to see past that and say, do you know what you're going to be when this is done? If you get through this, you're going to have an experience that most people don't go through, and you're going to have a fortitude and a tenacity that is not going to be beaten. And you can take that into other areas. And not only that, most addiction counselors are addicts because they're going to give back.
Wow.
Which is powerful, which is that whole concept again of group. And they've been there. I understand. And I don't believe that you have to be an addict to be an addictions therapist.
right.
But a lot of addicts feel that way.
Yeah.
Because you don't understand what I'm going through.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And sometimes that can become an excuse. But I just, I think we just really need to understand that everything we're going through, and if we can see it from a different perspective, have that paradigm shift, see the old lady instead of the young lady, or vice versa, and we can see what the end result is. I believe when Scripture talks about rejoice in your trials, it isn't about the trial, it's about what God is going to produce through it. And for them, being counted worthy. Now, how many times do we sit around and go, man, I feel so worthy that you've allowed me to go through this suffering? That's not even in our mindset. And I think that's an American thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely a Western thing. Yeah.
Don't touch.
Now I'm going to call it an American thing.
Western.
Right. Don't touch my rights. Don't touch me.
Yes.
Because I have them.
I'm sorry. I love you, brothers and sisters. But yeah, that from coming over here, that's very deep ingrained in the culture here. That sort of process of thinking.
Yep.
And it's a warped,
because it's allowed.
Well, it's allowed, but it's also a distorted version of what freedom and liberation is.
Yeah.
That's not how I would define it at all.
Yeah. Nope.
But and it bred a whole culture of entitled millennials.
Yeah.
Who have my rights, my right to define my gender, my right to define, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on and on.
Whatever it is.
All their truth. It's just become
Which is producing more anxiety. More problems.
Yeah.
Where do I stand? I don't know who I am. I don't know what I am. I don't know what's going on. I have no clue what I'm going to do.
Right.
And then you go to dump all this money into college. When I went to Valley Forge, it was Valley Forge College. Now it's Valley Forge University. And when I went there, man, it was you could tell it was an old Army hospital. It was rough.
Oh yeah.
Guys were getting showers and stuff, and a dude would bend down to wash his feet or something, and the shower head would fly off the wall. I mean, it was nuts. Banging. We would open up the window because it would get so hot in the dorm room. You're sweating, and I can't go to sleep.
Christian colleges didn't have any money. That's why that was part of it.
It cost me $28,000 to go there for 4 years.
wow.
When I went,
Think about that.
That was in '96.
Yeah.
So we would open up the window, and a couple of times this happened. Well, you'd wake up freezing to death because then the heat would cut off, and you got the window open, and it's December. or January. And a few times we'd look over and the couch would be covered in snow, man. We'd have to get snow shovels and throw the snow back out the window. That was the college. Now it costs $114,000 to go there to be a pastor. Doesn't that seem a little off?
Yeah.
A little.
But across the board,
good luck paying that back on a pastor's salary.
$114,000. I figured
so
it out.
ridiculous, man.
And it's that way everywhere.
That's crazy.
So how do you, so they're looking at this overwhelming debt.
Yeah.
What's the future? What's the hope?
And they're hoping to bail out. That's what they're hoping.
Right.
But even that's a drop in the bucket when you're looking 100.
Oh yeah, of course. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
People just have that mentality. Again, it's that entitlement. Hey, you should pay for this.
Yeah.
Somebody, But,
And now I'm and they're going to have a rude awakening. Work for some of the guys I worked for out there humping block and stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to tell them oh really? What you're going to do is walk down that street. That's what you're going to do
That's
with
what
no
you're
pay.
gonna do with no pay. Yeah.
There's no, you know what I mean? So they're going to be into this situation that they're not prepared for. They're not emotionally, mentally prepared for it. And it's going to not be good.
Yeah. It's definitely going to be difficult. That's for sure.
Yeah. Those type of jobs and things like that. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but those type of jobs and things like that, like you're talking about humping brick and just drywall, all that stuff, man, that's not, we don't do that here. We're college educated people now, it's moving that direction. So that skill set, they're dying for people to work in these fields. There's no workers, and a lot of them are immigrants and people from other countries that come in and take those jobs.
Different work ethic.
Different work ethic.
Yeah.
Different
Totally
culture.
different.
Yeah.
And it's the same in the UK. I don't want to name countries, but other countries have moved in. They'll take those jobs. They do it for half the price. But the thing is, they do it for half the price and they do it twice as fast and they do it better because they have a different work ethic.
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
don't complain.
Don't complain.
Yeah.
Like, look, they're not complaining.
Them.
They're just working.
Yeah. Just outwork people.
Exactly. They're outworking you.
Be the hardest worker in the room, right?
Summertime, we used to work. I mean, that was the time to gather.
Yeah.
So we'd be on the job by 6:30, 7 o'clock, and we wouldn't leave until the truck. I mean, it was dark.
Yeah.
We finished up with the truck lights on, and then you drive half hour, 45 minutes to the shop, and you drive 45 minutes from Gettysburg to Westminster and get a shower. Sometimes you're too tired, you just fall asleep, and you get back up, and you're like, and do it all over again. 7 days a week.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are like, I got to work 4 hours.
Come on.
Yeah.
Are you crazy? So I think all that stuff plays into it.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to bring it back. Sorry to interrupt you. So, because we touched on addiction, this is just my own personal interest. Are there personality types that are more susceptible, lean towards addiction? Are there personality types of extroverts, introverts? I don't know. There's so many different personality profiling systems out there. I don't want to get too deep into Myers-Briggs or whatever, but do you see trends or types of people, maybe they're watching and like, look, you do need to be more cautious. You do need to be more aware, or is that all myth? It's like, nah, everybody is susceptible to this.
No, I think there's people who are more susceptible to things in general. When I was when I was working on my graduate work, I had a professor that could hypnotize people. I always thought it was like, this is a bunch of stuff. And what he did is he had us stand there with our eyes closed, and you put your arms straight out like this, and you close your eyes. And then he would say, underneath your left hand is a balloon, and it's full of helium. It's getting lighter. It's raising your arm up. And you're just standing there while he's talking. And on your right hand, I'm putting a couple bricks on it. It's getting heavy. Man, it's getting really heavy. And he did that for a while. And then he said, okay, open your eyes, like stay where you are and open your eyes. And there would be people that were like this. So they were open to that suggestion. Well, the guy who was the worst, he used him, and he hypnotized him. And I watched that stuff. I'm not into it. I don't like it, but I saw it because I never believed it. And he pinched this dude on his arm, and he told him he was stroking it with a feather, and he pinched his arm so bad that he had his fingernail marks were in there, man. And then he had this stuff in a cup. I don't know what it was, but he asked him, what's your favorite scent? And he said, lavender. He says, oh man, well, I have this cup and I put some lavender oil in it. He uncovered it. Underneath his nose, he goes, oh man, that smells great. That smells good. He gave it to us to smell. Dude, it was rancid. It was
not lavender.
It was horrible.
Wow.
I was like, this is crazy. But anyway, so I think there are people who are more susceptible to things. I think about thoughts and stuff more so with that.
Yeah.
But addicts, the truly non-prejudiced thing is addiction.
Right.
It don't care what your financial status is.
Yeah.
It doesn't care what race you are. It doesn't
Personality either, right? It just
nothing.
doesn't care.
It will get you.
Wow.
I think that if you're more open to like peer pressure, you might get into it. But there's I just don't see a lot of people banging heroin and smoking meth who aren't getting addicted to it.
Yeah.
And I think it's either I just want to try it out and they get hooked, or like Len Bias.
Oh yeah.
First time he ever did crack, dead. He had, I don't know if he had a heart issue or what, but
number one draft pick in the NBA years ago in the 80s. Okay. He was like the top basketball player for the University of Maryland.
Healthy. Just all of that.
Unbelievable athlete.
He was a couple of years before Jordan, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Mm-hmm.
And he probably would have been like a Jordan. I mean, he was good. I mean, no one knows the future, but yeah. So I could be wrong. I mean, I don't know really, but I don't think so. From my experience, I don't think so. I've seen like some really. There was a guy who was a structural engineer. Guy was smart, man, intelligent, the whole nine, and just he could not get off the alcohol.
Yeah.
He was hooked on alcohol, man. He could not get off of it, and he would go for times, and he'd be back. And he ended up leaving. That's when I was at the Westminster Rescue Mission, and that's the thing about alcohol. That's the thing that, like, with society that bugs. What are the two drugs that you can die from during withdrawal?
Well, I'd say alcohol would be one, right?
Alcohol.
Yeah, no
and
idea.
Benzodiazepines, like your Xanax, all that. They're the only two. You can't die from meth. You can't die from heroin and withdrawal. But you can die from it during overdose.
Yeah.
And alcohol, once you get to a certain point, once you get to phase 3, your liver's not producing the enzymes anymore because chemicals have been so messed up that you go into what's called reverse tolerance. So you may be drinking a fifth of vodka a day, and all of a sudden you can't get down a half and you're gone. And it's because everything's starting to shut down.
Man.
And they'll hallucinate. I had a client, won't say if it's male or female, they came in and we were doing the assessment and stuff, and they were talking about things in the kitchen, moving, dancing on the table and in the kitchen. This is off alcohol.
Wow.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal.
And if it was illegal, there's no way it would become legal today.
Right.
Wow.
And there are people who can drink without getting, but those people have never used it as a fixer, as a way to cope about being stressed out or frustrated and stuff. I think we talked about that before last time. But
we even talked about it from the perspective of, man, I'm so stressed out I can't get to sleep, and I'll have a glass of wine. Somebody will have a glass of wine at night, and then that gets them to a place where they start to be dependent on that.
Yep.
And that's how it all the snowball.
That's phase 2. Yeah. You start to get dependent.
Yeah.
So let me ask this question, coming maybe back from some of the extremes of extreme addiction or extreme drug abuse or alcohol abuse to more what maybe most people watching this will deal with. I mean, I hope so. I think so. So where do you place using medication? And I will say this, I think we have to be really careful with language here about what is drugs and what is medication and where is that line, because politicians have made that line. And so, like me personally, I hate taking any kind of medication. I hate taking Tylenol. If I have a headache, I try 10 other things first, but that's just me personally. But as a doctor, or not as a doctor, as a healthcare professional, not me, healthcare professional, a head professional, where do you see the use for medication, and where do you see where it can help, and where do you see actually where it's just not necessary, right? Even trying to get a pattern of sleep, is melatonin always necessary, or are we creating these things that we're now dependent on, which leads to the next stronger thing that I need to sleep rather than dealing with the issue? So where do you think the place is for medication in most people's everyday lives? Yeah,
I think that if you can, like when I've had surgery, I've had like 13 or 14 of them. So when I have surgery, they always give you the oxycodone or Oxycontin or Demerol or whatnot when you're coming out of surgery, and I'm thankful. But after I don't like taking opiates. And it's not about the opiate. It's how I react to it. I get depressed. I don't like it. So I'll ask for Tylenol, ibuprofen, keep the inflammation down, and then you take it as long as you need to, but I don't think we need to take it as long as we do. And I guess it depends on everybody's threshold of pain. But being able to just kind of get through it. And the way surgeries are now, like the first time I had rotator cuff surgery, man, they cut you open. Man, that hurt. I was in pain. And I had to watch myself to take my Percocet when I was directed, and because I'd ate them things. I understand how people can just start,
Right.
And because really there's not a lot of opioid in that. I mean, it's a very small amount versus, I think I can't remember if it's Motrin, ibuprofen, I forget, but it's mixed, or Tylenol. But when it comes to things like, let's say for mental health and taking medication for that, I know some people get really stressed out about it. Like, I don't want to take any kind of psychotropic.
Right.
And I think that when you're dealing with depression or anxiety, that you should always start from not taking medication. If you can do it without taking it, then I think it's best. But sometimes people are at a place, if they're suicidal, I mean, they need to get on something. So how I try to help folks understand it is, if you're diabetic, the reason you're diabetic is because your organ, the pancreas, isn't producing enough insulin to get the blood sugar out of your system, right? So that's an organ that's not producing a chemical. Well, if you're in depression and it's severe and your brain's not producing enough serotonin, your brain's an organ and serotonin is a chemical. I don't understand what the difference is, because the medication is helping it to produce that serotonin. And in those cases, if the baseline is here and you're down here, you can't even work.
Right.
Like you can't even do the work necessary to keep you at baseline. So if we can use medication to bring you up and to get you to a place where you can think, you don't have, you're not struggling with not being able to sleep or sleeping constantly as much. You're able to get out of bed. You're able to focus and you're not confused, or you're kind of coming out of brain fog. If it can help with those things enough to where you can start putting in the work, then once you develop those skills, you've worked through the issues, then you come off of it slowly, but you come off of it. Because I don't think we should be dependent upon it ever. Now, if there's somebody who, and there's a lot of work being done on this right now to determine if this is the case or not, but if there's someone who just has a deficiency of serotonin, and that's just the way the brain is, and it's just not producing it, then you may need to be on it. And if that's the case, then that's the case. It's no big deal. You still need to learn some coping skills, but because if you don't and your brain's not producing it, and there's even some cases where your brain doesn't produce enough dopamine, which can cause depression, and it looks a little different. Like you don't have motivation. It's hard for you to get out of bed. It's those symptoms are more profound in that, and that's really hard to find because you have to be able to go into a specific type of scan or something like that, so they can take pictures and measure it and all that kind of weird stuff. But which I don't know anything about all that. But but I think that it's there if it's needed. But if we can do it without it, I always think that's best. And there's other things you can do, like for anxiety, passion flower. Passion flower actually blocks the uptake. So
I don't know what that is.
What is passion flower?
Passion flower is a tea. You can get it in tea. You can get it in drops. Yep. And it's natural. And
Passion flower.
Passion flower. And what it does is you've got the receptor, that GABA receptor.
Oh, so, GABA,
Yeah, so that gets produced. And what happens is it goes into the synapse, and then excess goes back up into the uptake and goes back up in, so it's preserved, and then it'll come back out again when. So
is GABA the link to all that, or is it?
The GABA is what helps us to. I believe GABA is to help us with anxiety, like not to get as anxious and to keep us calmer.
Okay.
So what the passion flower does is your uptake is here. The passion flower blocks it, so the GABA can't get back up in. So it keeps it in the synapses and helps us to bring calm. Helps us to be calmer and stuff.
Doesn't ashwagandha help that too? Does that help that a little bit? Okay.
I'm not sure. But if I'm going to ask somebody, like if somebody's going to ask me about, I'm going to tell them, why don't you try some passion flower? You can get it off Amazon. You can get it at health food stores. Get yourself some tea. If you don't like tea, get your drop. Boom.
Yeah.
Interesting. Passion flower.
Simple stuff. I just think there can be a bit of a stigma around medication. I will pray it away, and that's great. Pray, but at the same time, listen to professionals in terms of what's needed. We've gone pretty long. Are there any questions you want to finish up with? Yeah,
one that we just we skirted around a little bit. We talked about it briefly, but with your profession, Tony, what you're doing, how do you manage the spiritual side? Because you love Jesus with all your heart, and Scripture's a big piece of your life, God's word, and the importance of that in a person's life. But you're a professional, and you can't really go down that road, right? With
them,
with them. How do you manage that part? Because I'm sure that's difficult at times.
It was hard. It was harder than it is now because I wanted to tell everybody about Jesus. You need to get saved. It ain't going to fix everything, but it's going to fix
you're
your
an
soul.
evangelist at heart, right?
I want people to get saved. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I have and I realized that when I first became a Christian, I was an instructor and manager of a martial arts studio, and it was in Pikesville. So it's predominantly Jewish, and 80% of his clientele was Jewish. Well, being young and dumb, I said, I found your Messiah. And I started telling everybody, and I got fired.
You got fired, yeah.
Well, he warned me first, and I said, okay, and I stopped. And then parents started coming to me with their kids. I'm an instructor. I'm a martial arts instructor. I'm not some counselor. They started coming to me with their kids and stuff, and what am I going to do? So I said, well, I don't know what you believe, but I believe if you go after God, I didn't know anything about therapy and stuff. I'm like, if you go after God, it's going to help. And moms are crying and carrying on, and some people rededicated their lives. And he said, you got to go. So now I understand the wisdom that it's their business, it's not mine. So I'm not going to do that. But God's been gracious, one, to bring some Christians into therapy. And then those that aren't, there's still principles that are there, and I teach them those principles on how to think and different ones from like Proverbs and things. So that was a struggle at first. And then also realizing that, there's some who plant seeds, there's some who water, some who bring the harvest, but it's God who brings the increase. So it's not really my job. Just like the why. The why is absolutely none of my business.
It's good.
My business is to obey. My business is to love and to worship you.
Oh, yes. So good.
That's my business. And I think I think that's another part of it, is when we start stepping out of our lane and trying to take on God's job or trying to understand things that we're not supposed to understand, it really wigs you out. And it's just, and I really had to come to that. You know what, God, this is really none of my business, and I can't handle it, so why am I going to try? And with the spiritual aspect of it, I just teach principles, and I don't bring up scripture, and I just love them. And I pray for them all. I pray for all my clients, because ultimately, and I think it's hard for us too sometimes, is that we want to do and we want to produce. And prayer is the greatest thing you can do, is just go to prayer and say, God, bring the one. When it comes to salvation, bring the one that they'll hear. You're the one who orchestrates all this. You're sovereign. So bring it to happen and use me however you want in their life. And I know right now, because they've crossed my door, I can pray for them and nobody can stop me from doing that. So I do. And not just for spiritually, but for God to heal them, God to give them understanding of their emotions and mentally and to grow, just to have a better life. And I think we should do that just from a humanity standpoint. And just be there for people.
Yeah. And I love that you are a conduit for God's healing. It's in a different way, I think, sometimes to how we expect. We want the miraculous in the moment, but I think so much of God's healing is a process, and it's time, and it's people really committed to the work that you're doing. And I think it's actually the harder thing. It's the greater sacrifice to say, no, I'm committed to you for however long this takes to see your healing come about. And I'm going to walk side by side. And I just think that is as spiritual as it gets.
Yeah, that was good. Thanks, Tone, for coming in today. I appreciate it. You got one more thing?
Yeah, just through the taking on, like when you're talking about taking on their suffering and stuff, it just kind of opens up a little bit of a window to see what Christ did.
Yeah.
What he did for us,
Amen. So. That's good, man. Well, man, we're gonna drop the mic on that one. That was a great ending, man. Thanks, Tony, for coming in today.
Thank you
again. So appreciate you, Pastor Jonathan, joining in today. We hope that in some way this enriched your life.